Okay, this is installment 4 of the Evolution of Modern Homo sapiens lecture. We stopped when we got to this slide about Neandertal tools. So I already told you about the Middle Stone Age and Mousterian tools and what characterized them as Mousterian, and they were made with that level-wad technique. So that characterizes the stone tools that the Neanderthals used. They, rather than having like these big hand axes, the Mousterian tools were basically blades. So even if they were projectile, again, they're not really projectile points, but spear points, they are so much more refined and really perfected that they're more blade-based than chopper-based. So the term blade-based technology just means that they're nicer and they're more refined. Again, they did have composite tools. They hefted spear points onto wooden spears. But another thing that we don't really think of all that often as tools are teeth. And Neanderthals are known for using their teeth as tools. So here in the picture you can see, the wear patterns on these teeth. So we know that they held hides in their teeth and they scraped hides. And we know that because we actually see sort of accidental scrape marks on some teeth. We see these really extreme wear patterns, and that really shows us how often they use their teeth, sort of as a fifth hand. So this is something that we see actually more in Neanderthals than in a lot of other humans, or hominin. And that's my dog, so I'm going to pause this for a minute. Modern Homo sapiens, then, that's us. So we did overlap in time with Neanderthals for several thousand years. The differences between us and Neanderthals are sort of myriad. So we're much more gracile in the skull and in the postcrania. So the bones are thinner, the muscle attachments are smaller. Our brow ridges are much less distinct. Our cranium, the actual skull case, is much more rounded. We have a more defined chin. And our average cranial capacity is 1350 cubic centimeters. So you don't need to know the cranial capacities or anything. But what you do need to know is that our cranial capacity is actually, it's slightly larger than archaic Homo sapiens, but it's slightly smaller by sometimes around 100 cubic centimeters than Neanderthals. And we have a lot of variation in cranial capacity. So these pictures are dumb, but they show us that my dad and I were goofing around in like JCPenney or something, and we have the same hat on. I have it on backwards, of course. But it fits us substantially differently. So these are two adults that are actually genetically related, and our cranial capacity is significantly different. And that's actually characteristic of our species. We are highly variable. And that's sort of one of the things we've been talking about with other hominin is it's hard to account for variability when all we have are skeletons and fossils. So who knows, maybe future anthropologists would say, oh, this must be a different species than this because of the different cranial capacities and other features. But we know that we are not. So we are a highly, highly variable species, and symbolic thought really characterizes our culture. So, like I said, language, writing, even this hat. This is the University of Michigan. It's a fake little football cap thing. When you look at this picture, you know that it's winter, it's close to Christmas. These are Christmas decorations that were in the department store. So all of these things symbolize different things, whether you realize it or not. So that is something that is widespread in modern humans, and it was never widespread in any earlier hominin. We don't exactly know how this evolved. It's basically a change in brain function, and so when we look at food that we eat that's different than other hominin, well, we cook our food, and that's different, but we've already seen that. We eat both plants and animals, but we've already seen that. So it's really hard to say why this came about, and there are a lot of different ideas and theories out there. But we look at behavior, we look at artifacts that we see, we look at genetics when we can, and we study anatomy through the actual skeletal remains. And we use all of these things to characterize what is a modern human. There are two, well, there are actually more than two, but there are two main models of how modern humans evolved. The replacement or out of Africa model and the multi-regional model. So we're going to talk about those for a couple of minutes. The replacement model says, so before I get into that, I guess I should say that we actually don't even know where modern humans even originally came from. Did we evolve all over the old world, or did we evolve just in Africa and then we expanded out of Africa, much like Homo erectus did? We don't actually know this. So in Africa, we find modern human skeletons that are around 200,000 years old. In the Near East, around 100,000 years old. In Europe, around 40,000 years ago. In Asia, around 65,000 years ago. Southeast Asia, 40,000 years. And Australia, around 40,000 years. So we see modern anatomy earliest in Africa. And that's important. It's not a really clear indicator of the fact that we definitely evolved in Africa, but it's a clue. So people that take that as a really important clue say, well, we must have evolved in Africa. Our origin is localized to Africa. And modern humans had a second dispersal out of Africa. The first dispersal was Homo erectus. So Homo erectus went and settled all over the old world. And then in Africa, in this model, modern humans continued to evolve. And then they spread out into the old world. And in the replacement model, it's called the replacement model. So in the replacement model, what happened was when modern humans left Africa and went into Europe and the Middle East and Asia, we encountered these earlier hominin and we replaced them. Whether we replaced them by killing them all, or out-competing them, or mating with them, or whatever, we replaced them. We don't really, mating with them isn't a really good option for this one, because then their genetics are still around. But that's the replacement model. There was a second wave of dispersal out of Africa of modern humans, and we replaced all of the pre-existing hominin. So in this model, those Homo erectus that settled in Asia would not be related to modern Asian populations, because those original Homo erectus guys were replaced by modern humans. So this is one model. Another model for the evolution of modern Homo sapiens is called the multi-regional model. It also has a very descriptive name, and it says that there was that original dispersal of Homo erectus out of Africa that everybody agrees on. And that dispersal, people settled all over. They settled in Europe, they settled in the Middle East, they settled in Asia, and there were still hominin in Africa. And this model says that because of gene flow, so just movement of people and therefore their genes from one population to the next, modern humans evolved all over, more or less simultaneously, all over the old world. So in this scenario, modern Asian populations are related to those original Homo erectus people that settled in Asia. We don't know which of these is true. Okay? Every decade or so, opinions go back and forth. There are some hybridized models, and the one that is most likely true is actually a hybridized model. So, because we have those fossils that were found in Africa first, it's not unreasonable to assume that modern Homo sapiens actually did evolve in Africa. But I already mentioned that we have actually sequenced the human genome and the Neanderthal genome, and we have Neanderthal DNA. So in all likelihood, what may have happened is modern Homo sapiens evolved in Africa, dispersed out of Africa, but then rather than straight up replacing all of these earlier hominin, mated with some of them. And the Neanderthals are one type of hominin that they likely mated with. So that's a little bit of a hybrid model, and that's probably more likely true. So both of them are supported in some ways, which is why opinions differ, but these are the two main models that you actually need to be familiar with. Okay, so we already glanced at this. but this is just showing you that we have modern Homo sapien skeletal remains in Africa first, before anywhere else. And then, so regardless of whether we evolved all over the old world or just in Africa, the next place that we see is really the Near East, the Middle East. And if modern humans did evolve in Africa, this would make sense that they would come to this region first because it's on the way to the rest of the old world. So this sort of supports that replacement model as well. In Europe, we see some differentiation between modern human populations and here and elsewhere. So we actually see a new stone tool assemblage. It's only found with modern Homo sapiens. It's not found with Neanderthals, and it's only found in Europe. It's called the Aurignacian. And so this idea that modern humans in this one region would have this culture that's different from modern humans everywhere else actually implies, excuse me, a little bit more the multi-regional model. So different pieces of evidence imply different things, and it's not super strong evidence, but people do say that sometimes. So this is just another really advanced stone tool assemblage that is not found in a variety of places. It's really only found in Europe. So Mousterian tools, for instance, are found literally everywhere that you find Homo neanderthalensis, but Aurignacian tools are only found in modern populations in Europe specifically. Another piece of evidence, I guess, of modern humans in Europe is Cro-Magnon man. Okay, so the Cro-Magnon skeletons date to around 27,000 years ago. And if you look at anatomy, people argue that Cro-Magnons are a perfect example of a population that looks like it was a mix of modern humans and Neanderthals. So interbreeding between modern humans and Neanderthals, based entirely on anatomy. So that's a possibility, right? And that supports that hybridized model. So populations of modern humans in Asia actually date to around 65,000 years ago. But we talked about how dating in some regions is easier than others. In Asia, it's actually relatively difficult to date any archaeological finds, really. So there have been a few different skeletal finds in Asia, but they're difficult to date. We guess around 65,000 years ago. Southeast Asia, this is a lot of Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam are in here. Remember, this is an area that varies dramatically in terms of exposed land during glacial periods. And so we have a lot of movement then that we may not have now, or vice versa. But we do find some skeletal material here around 40,000 years ago. Australia is even more extreme. So to get to Australia at all times would have required some form of water travel. So we do see some modern humans in Australia around 40,000 years ago. Excuse me. So that would have taken actual boat type of things, rafts, to get to Australia. This would have, it may not have been deliberate, like we're going to Australia, but it would have implied that there was some sort of deliberate water travel, which is important. To build a boat or any floating device would take some forethought rather than, hopping on a log that's floating down a river. So it would have been much more intensive than that. All right, so these are slides. All of this is up on Canvas. These are just study slides to help you look at this material. So look through those. This is talking about the genus Homo and where we have different fossil finds. And ask me any questions, send me any emails, and I will see you in class.